A lot of things that we've been talking about this week, and I want to kind of pick up where we left off yesterday, and that is just discussing fair use, because a lot of us, you know, creative people take a lot of influences from other people's work. The problem is we don't want to overuse it. We want to be able to take it and do something with it. We talked a lot about sampling, whether that's fair use or not. It all kind of depended on what its factors were. We talked about the major factors. Number one, what's the point of it being used? Are we doing it for nonprofit? Are we doing it for education? Are we doing it for news and factual representation? The other factors, the other one I mentioned is what is the material that you're actually replaying? Are you using it as opposed to being able to broadcast or recommit? We did kind of talk about that last week. It was yesterday, really. News, protect. When we're trying to protect the creators with fair use, that's the thing. Like, they could use that sample, they can use that clip, but is it detrimental to the original creator? That's going to be a difficult one to decide. How much of the actual information is going to be used? Is it substantiated? Is it a lot? When we're talking about the ideas of quantity versus quality, those things come into play tremendously when thinking about whether fair use is legal in this part or not. And really, that's when it comes to a court case, what they're really looking at is the substantiation of the amount of it using on the quantity and how good the quality is of it. And we're going to actually dip in a little bit of that today when we talk about parity, because parity kind of falls under this substantiation quality element. And then finally, what effect did it have on the market? Now, we didn't quite dive deep into that concept yesterday, but we are going to have to take a look at that when a lot of these court cases come up and start talking about things. We really have to be sure what we're dealing with before we go to court and have all our facts straight. The last little bit of information we talked about was transformative use. Did it change enough? And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at today. Did we change it enough in order for it to be new and different? But we're using it as an influence. We're using it as a creative idea to create our own thing. So let's dip into a little bit of that concept, because we really have to look at the difference between what a parody is and fair use is, and whether that's going to violate copyright law. And again, we'll go back to copyright and what it is. Copyright protects the creative element of a creative piece. Like, for instance, a photo. The minute you take a photo, that's an original photo, it is copyrighted. You actually have the copyright of every single photo you've ever taken with your phone or with a digital DSLR camera. Film, anything you film, anything you do like that, copyrighted. You did it. You created it. It was creative. Anything audio that you recorded or did, that is copyrighted. The minute you recorded something, what we always say is post it. Post it immediately. Put it up on SoundCloud. Put it up on YouTube. As long as it's 100% your work, it is now substantiated by putting into a fixed medium like a online resource. Or if you burn it to a CD, or you have it on a flash drive, or you create a audio file out of it, it usually has metadata, which has a date and time that it was created. There really is no need to send it over to the Library of Congress to register it with Washington. It doesn't hurt, because then you have the power of the federal government behind you in case a court case does come up. But the point is, anything that is copyrighted is immediately copyrighted once it's substantiated, once it's in a fixed medium on your phone, printed out, file is created, whatever that is. All right. So that's really what the copyright is. Those are really what is protected, and that's anybody. So you can't violate that as another creative person. We did go through those factors, like I said, of fair use, and that's usually what the argument is that anytime someone is, quote unquote, sued for violating copyright, they try to find all the factors that can claim it as being used as fair use. And I said those factors are: what was the point of it? What was the material used? What was the amount? What was the effect on the market? Does it take money away from the original creative person? If you talk about music, is it in a different genre? Which is a lot of times how the hip hop and electronic artists get away with it, because it's a completely new genre and they're pulling in music from blues or jazz or country, not rock, not rap, not anything like that. So you really have the benefit of saying, well, it's fair use because I'm really not affecting the market. But you also have to look at all the factors. And we're going to do that with a couple of these cases that we're going to discuss today. The first one I want to quickly mention, and I don't know if many of you follow what's going on in the world, but the Dixie Chicks are a band. And they created a lot of music in the 90s and the 2000s. Maybe not as popular today, though they have their following. And obviously, they're a country artist group. 3 women. I don't know if they're all sisters, but I think 2 of them are at least. I guess we can go into the about part of Spotify and find out. I don't know all the background of it. But yeah, there's a bunch of, let's see here. Hold on. Let me see. I want to put on this computer. There we go. And so, yeah, there was a song that the Dixie Chicks wrote called Wagon. And let me give you a little background of the song. The song itself is quite scandalous because it's all about them, getting drunk, getting hammered, being wild here on Earth, and fearing what's going to happen once you die and go to heaven. And that's what the song premise is. So they use a little bit of the idea of another song. It's very fast. It's very upbeat country. It's wild, right? Just picture 3 young women just going crazy in the world. Okay. But the premise of the song is just that. I mean, this is what we're talking about here. There's a song. Has this creative idea of going wild here on Earth and fearing going to heaven. And it's fast, it's crazy, it's in the country genre. But they were sued. They were sued by a gentleman called Albert, and I'm just going to look up, so it's I'll Fly Away. There we go. And it was done in a bunch of different genres as well. But it was done by a gentleman named Albert Brownlee. Where is he? He should be down here somewhere. Albert Brownlee, Brumley. There it is, Albert Brumley, and I'll Fly Away. So you could hear now when I play this how different it is. This is very much like a soul type of song. It's done with the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square and an orchestra. So there's all sorts of differences in that original makeup, and there is an idea that it is an opposite version of what the Dixie Chicks did. And this song was done back in 1930. I've been really good here on Earth, but it's been torturous, and I can't wait till I go to a better place up in heaven. So it's an opposite idea from what the Dixie Chicks did. It's an opposite concept, but some of the wording inside of it and some of the melodies inside of it are there. So the Dixie Chicks took this idea and did the opposite of it. Sometimes even the parodies like from Weird Al are kind of crazy, right? He changes everything up, makes it completely different, but uses the music, uses the melody of the lyric singing or rapping or whatever it is. But what's great about Weird Al is he actually gets all of the rights before he does it. He has permission from every single person. So he never worried about violating copyright, although I think he had some sort of case where they got permission, but it wasn't to the specifications that were originally agreed to. So he got hit with some sort of lawsuit at one point. But most of the time now, Weird Al's probably the most well-known parody-based writer in the world. All right, going back to the Dixie Chicks and Brumley, the I'll Fly Away case went to court. And they actually the Dixie Chicks used the 3 words of the song, I'll Fly Away. That's pretty much about what they used. Everything else was fairly original, although it was a opposite version of Brumley's song. But they used the I'll Fly Away. Now, if they didn't use I'll Fly Away, it probably would have been fine. But the Dixie Chicks, they got sued. And in the end, what happened was the Dixie Chicks sued and settled out. They didn't actually have a award-winning court case, or wasn't to the plaintiff or to the defendant. It was just kind of settled out of court. And here was the argument, was fair use used? The Dixie Chicks came up with a relatively brand new melody, much faster in a different genre, right? They ended up using those three words, but we talked a little bit about yesterday the factors that go into fair use. What is the point? What is the material? What is the amount? And this was a very, very, very small amount of information from the original song that was used. So does that make it legal? I mean, I would have, if I was trying to argue the case, I would have said the Dixie Chicks were fine using it. They used a opposite concept, but did not really mimic the song, did not steal a clip, did not sample it, did not rewrite the exact lyrics and cover the song. They didn't do any of that. They took a concept and made an opposite original creative concept from it. They actually flexed their First Amendment right, the right to free speech. But unfortunately, because of the words that were used, it was too much for the courts to decide in the Dixie Chicks' favor. So they did use, obviously, something from the original artist to make money, right? We look at the factors. They took too much of the creative expression, which was this idea of going crazy here and being repentive up, and the opposite concept, but it was kind of too much of that over the top. They did take in a lot of money from that album in 1999 or 1998 or whatever that year that song came out. I can go back really quick and take a look at it. But it was a really popular album at the time. People, they made a lot of money on it. This was 1999, right? So yeah, that's kind of the height of their mainstream music, I would say. So did it change the market? That's the other thing we had to look at. And I don't think it did. The Dixie Chicks are in a completely different market than Brumley's soulful, gospel-y, Southern Baptist-y kind of genre that he fit into. So did it make the song better? No, because it really had very little to do with the original one. Almost, like I said, paid homage to it. But was it different enough? And because they said those three little words, the court was like, it's not different enough, which is crazy. 3 words changed the outcome of that case. And they ended up having to settle out of court. In my opinion, it was a parody, right? They took an idea and they changed it a lot. They would have won had they probably not used those words. But unfortunately, out of the factors that we looked at the other day, only one of the 4 factors would have won them in the court. So they wouldn't have been 50-50. It wouldn't have been 3/4, or they wouldn't have settled all the factors. One of them isn't enough to win that case. So they ended up settling out of court and paid Brumley a substantial amount of money. And then, of course, went back through the process to continue to sell that album and to stream it today by getting the copyright or getting the rights, getting the permission, and paying the appropriate royalties and fees. So there's, that case, which is really interesting because it doesn't seem like a lot was done to infringe on a copyright. But when it comes down to it, if you look at every factor and you have a checkbox next to it, it's sometimes really tough not to say that they used enough or they ripped off the idea. You got to be really careful. Did they do it on purpose? They might say they never heard of the song. Get out of here. You didn't make an opposite idea with the words "I'll fly away" in it without knowing the original song. So that is really what it comes down to. It's like, what do you think, we're stupid? You definitely did it. There's no way there's that, small occurrence of magic and fate that would have completely created that new project, obviously. I mean, just look at the facts. So there's that one. I got another example for you. This one's actually a little more iffy, and it's kind of crazy. We're going to go to a much bigger known song from the Beatles. The song is called "She Loves You." It's a song on one of their first albums. So I got to go through thousands of songs right here. Let's see if it's in this one. There you go. We'll do the mono remastered version. But you guys know This song. So let's look at that for a moment because that's where the copyright infringement happens. Okay. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. There's three yes. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Three yes. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Three yes. And she loves you, yeah, 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 yeah. Four yes. And I know we're nitpicking, right? But that's the way the song starts, and that's the way the song ends. So it makes up actually a really large majority of it, considering that it's only a 2 minute and 20-second song. And that phrase is repeated both at the front and at the back. If you total up the time, we're going to say about 30 seconds of a 2 minute and 21-second song, which is a lot. It's a substantial amount. That's, if we put it together, it's about a quarter of the song, right? A little less than a quarter of the song is that repetitive melody. So we're going to go over to Mr. Copyright Infringement, Joe Diffie, and he came up with a song, and he actually didn't even try. He actually created a song called "Bigger Than the Beatles." So right off the bat, you're already telling people we're going to use the Beatles, one of the biggest bands in all of the world, in all of music history. And we're going to write a song that is going to, quote unquote, pay homage. Let's hear how the song sounds, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences just for a moment. Okay. Well, it doesn't sound anything like She Loves You, Yeah, 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 right? Not even close. Doesn't even sound close. Sorry, someone's saying that they can't get into the Zoom, but there are 13 people in here. So more than likely, they'll have to just try it again, Vince. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't have the participant window open and I couldn't get them in. So try again. I'm going to write, try again. Try again. Yeah, I usually have the participant window. No, I will let you in soon. I just didn't have it there, Vince. Sorry, buddy. Try again. So he'll come in this time and I'll let him in. I don't have the participant window open while I'm teaching the lesson, so I don't see it. It used to be that Zoom would like blink, letting me know someone's in the waiting room, but it doesn't blink anymore. I think it's a setting I have to go fix. All right, anyway, so this song, Bigger Than the Beatles, created by Joe Diffie, um, you know, doesn't sound like She Loves You, Yeah, 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 or She Loves You. So I'm not exactly sure what the infringement could be. Let's take a listen to the back end of the song here and see if we can pick out what the problem is. And you heard it. There's the problem. Yeah, 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 yeah. When you have a song called Bigger Than the Beatles, and then you put a yeah, 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 you're kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. So here's what happened. They go to court. The Beatles were not, hard about this. The record label wasn't trying to really make a huge deal of it. Of course, Joe Diffie ended up saying this is a parody. It is not in the same key. It is not the same chords. It's fair use. And the answer is, unfortunately, no, it's not. Because Joe Diffie didn't just do it once. He did it 4 to 5 times throughout the entire last, let's say, 45 seconds of the song. So we'll go back to our notes here about the factors that go into fair use versus violating copyright. What's the point of the use? Did they make copy for nonprofit? No, that's not it. Was the material, or what is the material? Was it factual? Yeah, it was factual. It didn't. It wasn't factual. It was using a creative idea from the Beatles. So we can't say that is going to work for him. What's the amount? Was it a lot or a little? In this case, last 45 seconds. That's a little too much, guy. Did it have an effect on the market? I'm going to say no. Again, another country artist that doesn't really cross over with the Beatles all that much, though there is some rock and roll in there, so it could be iffy. It's 50-50 on that. And was there any transformative use of this? Did they change it enough? I don't know. And I think that's really where it got hung up, where Joe did not have the amount of check boxes in the fair use category as he probably should have. And he ended up not winning this. And he ended up having to pay royalties and or licensing fees for the use of the yeah. And it's so silly and simple. But these are things you have to be really careful of when you're doing creative stuff. It's extremely important to make sure that you have enough change, enough of a difference between the two. And of course, if you're going to do it in little tiny bits and pieces, because if you use too much of it, or if you repeat it over the course of time, all of that time starts adding up to when a court case comes up that can say, well, it made up, a third of the song. And that's way too much for a copyright law to uphold. It's too much. You can't use all that much work in a 3-minute song. It's way too much. So we're going to take a look really quick at some differences. Let's peek at a couple of things that you guys are familiar with. Copyrights, which we've been talking about this week. Trademarks, which you know as that little TM in a circle next to companies that supply goods and services. And patents, which we have talked about on Monday because we were discussing things like invention and science. All three of these things help protect various industries. We'll start with the copyright. We know it's a creative protection for anyone who's creating things like photography or film or audio, lyrics, artwork, sculpture. You can go into all of the different sects of or areas of art and entertainment, but it's pretty much a blanket statement on anything creative. The minute you think of it, the minute it comes out of your brain and goes onto a fixed medium, it is copyrighted. Obviously no one can read your brain to know and understand what's happening in order to take it from you or to steal it from you. So really a lot of times it comes from you putting to a fixed medium where people then can hear it and steal it. But again, the minute you put it down onto something physical, whether it be on a website or whether it be on a hard drive, you own the copyright. You own the copyright to the information. You own the copyright to the creative element. You own the copyright to the melody. You own the copyright to the lyrics, everything straight across the board. Again, you don't technically need to register it with Washington. It's not necessary. It's recommended. It doesn't cost all that much, relatively speaking, to the other two, but there's a little bit of an application process. You have to send it in. And I think at this point, the Library of Congress has everything digitized, so you can probably just email or upload the file of the song or whatever. And then it's there in Washington in case anyone ever tries to sue you or you try to sue somebody else. And it's just proof of date and time. But honestly, like I said, it's not 100% necessary for copyrights. Like we said, the previous versions of this would be to mail it to yourself, right? And you have the stamp of the United States Postal Service with a date and time. As long as you don't open it in a sealed envelope, technically now it's proof that you created on that day and that time. You would mail it to yourself, which is silly. But they didn't have any other way of proving back then. Nowadays, with all our technology, it's very, very easy to prove that you did it first. So that's copyright. Let's talk a little bit about patents. Patents are much different. You're going to need a lot more for the old patent. I'm going to say if you haven't watched a single episode of Shark Tank that you probably should, because a lot of times the patent comes up. And why is a patent so important? Well, because it protects the idea in a physical way, in a design way, and in a scientific way. Let me discuss what that means. First of all, a patent is going to cost you close to about $20,000 to get. You're talking about hiring your own expensive patent attorney, a very specific patent attorney. It's really meant to protect inventions. Let me give you an example. The first one is a utility patent. This is the one that comes up on Shark Tank a lot, right? All the items that are going to be sold have a design to them. They have some sort of form and purpose and function, something that's useful to people. That is what you'd want a utility patent for. Very easy. For instance, if you go to the movies, and they give you that tray that has all the components in there for the popcorn, for the drink, for all that. It's useful. It's a utility. Whoever designed that and wants to sell it should get a patent on it. Otherwise, anyone else can make it and sell it to United Artists or to whatever else, film companies that have theaters all over the place. Another example would probably be, even Starbucks lid. The lid on a Starbucks coffee is a patent lid. They have a patent on it because it has the spout for the drinking area, has the little, was it a reservoir that allows spilled coffee to settle below the line so it doesn't spill out onto the floor, onto you, or in your car. I mean, even the little sleeve that went onto the Starbucks coffee, that's a really hot, piping hot coffee, had as a patent on it. That design of the form and function, I'll say the form and function of the sleeve is patent. And no one else can make it but them for their coffee. So they own that, especially since they are now a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar company. They can afford $20K and hire a attorney when they come up with new designs to get the patent so no one rips it off. All right, so that's a utility patent. The second one is called a plant, P-L-A-N-T patent. Plant patent is very interesting. This has a lot more to do with science. When you're creating new medicines, when you're doing cross-pollinizations, creating new hybrids of plants, when you're using science in medicine, this is where you're going to need a patent on your basically chemical composition. That's hard to do physically unless you actually do it physically, grow it, make it, and have it there, which is what they'll end up having to do. Again, it still costs a lot of money to get the patent on it, but Advil doesn't technically have a patent on its chemical makeup, but it does have a patent on the design of how they encapsulate and coat and stamp all that information onto the pill and market it to the public. So the plant patent has a lot to do with science and medicine. So again, if you're making an energy drink, right, and it has a very specific composition of ingredients that you would need a plant patent on. If in fact you had a very specific cup or glass or bottle or can that you'd store it in, you'd need the utility patent for. So there's two patents you'd need. And the last patent is your design patent, the design of a thing. So design comes from things like cars or boats or engines or brand new technology. I was watching the other day the Rocket Man pack now that they have, which is a propulsion device that you put on your back and you can shoot across the land, water, or sea. And it's very interesting, but the design of that had to be patented so no one else could rip off where you put this part and where you put that part. People like Apple have huge design patents, right? Their iMac could not be replicated in any way, shape, or form. When that came out, what a unique design and arrangement of, I guess, parts and pieces. And that was a huge deal for them because no one else could rip it off. Nowadays, there are all-in-one computers as well, but they had to change things in order to not violate the patent that Apple originally had. Patents are good for 20 years. So your $20K covers you for 20 years. After 20 years, you have to re-up and do it all over again, or you lose the patent and someone else can re-patent their device without violating yours. So in an interesting turn of events, you're basically paying $1,000 a year and you own the rights to your utility patent, design patent, or plant patent. And after that, you lose it or you have to re-register. So patents are a much bigger deal than copyrighting creative information. Last but not least, trademarks, the TMs. You know about these TMs. These are to help identify goods and services. You want to distinguish between these services. You don't want to have a company called Moon Investing get confused with Moon driveway pavers, right? Those are two totally different services. If they, for some reason, used very similar logos where the O's were half crescent moons, you might get confused. And instead of going off and trying to get your driveway repaved, you end up getting, financial servicing. So a lot of companies, what they do is they trademark, not just to protect their design of the logo to define their company and their service, but to also help separate it so the public knows the difference between them. This is a little less expensive. It's about $290. And the application is a little lengthy. So some people end up getting a trademark attorney just to help them out with the process. And a lot of companies are already going to have an in-house attorney that can do this. It's just one of the roles of the attorney of the place to kind of uphold all the trademarks and information about the company. Again, the whole concept of a trademark is not to confuse the consumer, that they're getting the product that they want. They don't want two companies with the same name and very similar logo selling either completely separate things or even very similar things. And then you got cases where company versus company have a problem with each other because they're both called Moon Concrete Pavers, and one's in California and one's in New York, but they have a very similar logo and they have a very similar service. That's very confusing and competitive. Not to say anyone from California is going to come over here in New York and pave my driveway, but it's still competing in one way, shape, or form in the digital landscape on the internet to get your business, to make phone calls, to get quotes. And what if Moon Landscaping or Moon Concrete Pavers sets up a satellite office in New York? Now you got two Moon Concrete Pavers in New York. Oh boy, that's a problem. So one of them better trademark their logo so it clearly identifies and it keeps other companies from using the same exact symbol, name. Even the name has a lot to do with it, and the service itself. I'll give you a very popular problem. Two huge names in both the entertainment and technology world that had to work out a deal. We're going to go back to the Beatles again. A lot of Beatle talk today, right? The Beatles recorded at Abbey Road Studios a lot. They also recorded other places, but that was one of the places well known. And their record label was called Apple Records. And they had Apple Music, and they had Apple Recording Studios, and they had other Apple-based companies. But that was fine back in the 60s and in the 70s. And then when it got into about the 80s to 90s, when Apple computers started to emerge, the Beatles were like, it could get a little confusing here. If you're going to call yourself Apple, we're going to have a problem because, we don't want anyone to get confused that the Beatles are creating computers. They're not. It sounds ridiculous. And Paul said, I want a little bit of keyboard. Maybe I'll get myself a mouse. Play an Oregon Trail out there. So they had to kind of get together and settle this. Apple's argument, we're going to stay Apple because we're going to create computers. It has nothing to do with music at the time. When Steve Jobs and Wozniak and all those guys, if you watch any of those documentaries and or full-length feature films about Apple Computer, there were, and I'm going to go on Apple Computer versus Beatles, there was no such thing as the idea of computers being used for music. It was mostly used for work and data. But you know what Apple did? Apple created the entertainment market for computers. They turned it into something people were using for work and made it into an entertainment device you would have at home. In 1978, Apple Corp. And the Beatles founded holding company and owner of their record label, Apple Records, filed a lawsuit against Apple Computer for the trademark infringement. The suit finally settled in 81 with an undisclosed amount being paid to Apple Corp. Apple Corp. Were the Beatles. And that's an interesting little tidbit for you. If you ever bought a Beatles record, there's a beautiful, what looks like a Granny Smith apple as the logo for Apple Records. So this was the problem. They needed to figure out a way to separate what was going on with the Beatles and then what was happening in the computer world. And they settled. Yeah, they figured it out. Apple Computer, now called Apple Inc., is different from Apple Corp., owned by the Beatles. So there's a bunch of things here that you got to think about, because Apple Computers started out as being very functional and work-based. But then, as you know, as the 80s and 90s and 2000s and now, Apple Computer started getting more and more entertaining. And then, of course, with the Apple Computers iTunes Music Store, now Apple is actually getting into the music industry. So what needs to get done to help separate the Apple Corps that the Beatles owned from the Apple Computer that's out there? On May 8th, 2006, the court ruled in the favor of Apple Computer, holding that no breach of the trademark agreement had been demonstrated. There was a agreement, like I said, back in the late 70s, early 80s, that they could still operate under the name Apple as long as they didn't violate any of the cross marketing rules. And then, of course, Apple moved much faster than they ever thought, and they didn't think about that relationship too much because they were making hand over fist. And a trial was open in 2006, stating that they used the Apple logo again in the music industry, and that's where they think they crossed the agreement, but they didn't. Really, it's two separate companies, right? Apple Corp. And Apple Inc. And that's where they had to start changing the logo. The logo used to be a brightly colored rainbow flag looking Apple logo. And then it slowly changed into this ominous white glowing logo on most of their computers. It also now substantiates in almost like a shadow black on a lot of the iMacs. And then there was all sorts of stuff going on in the background. Obviously, the Beatles ended up becoming part of the iTunes Music Store. They actually held out a very long time before they put their stuff in iTunes. It was kind of like a disruption. People didn't love that they couldn't get the entire catalog of the Beatles through iTunes. And then that eventually opened up, I think, in EMI in 2007 or so. They would let the entire Beatles catalog appear on iTunes. And so by 2011, it finally did happen. And now you can pretty much find, the entire Beatles catalog on the iTunes Music Store. But it's so funny because it's just a simple thing like Apple. The trademark that the Beatles had on their Apple Corp was infringed on by a computer company. Initially, it was all worked out. But then as one company started evolving and changing, negotiations have to be reopened up. So now that both are kind of crossing into each other's markets, it's going to become a little bit of a problem. And so they did. They worked it out. It took quite a long time and probably millions of dollars on both sides to do it. But these are just simple things that are out there that you can help protect your goods and services, is getting a trademark and getting it held up. Because do you want to spend millions of dollars on your construction company trying to fight Apple Computer? I mean, that'd be a lot of money, a lot of wasted of time. All right. So again, the three major things: copyright is creative, a patent is more invention-based, and a trademark is more the identification of a company and its goods and services, all of which have federal government backing. Some are more, confusing and or some are actually longer lasting than others. I think a trademark is 20 years as well. Copyright, we know, is the life of the artist plus 70 years. And they all cost a lot. They cost much differently than each other. So the patent is $20K. The trademark is $290. And I think the copyright, depending on what you're sending in, if you're just sending in lyrics, I think it's like $9 a sheet. If you're doing a full recording, I think it's like 20 something or 30 something dollars. We can check that out tomorrow. But the key here is to protect everyone from their creative responsibilities and inventions and companies and businesses. And that's really what it's all about. It's just protection against people taking what you did and using it for their own good. Now, tomorrow we're going to look at this a little bit, talk a little bit about revenue deals. This whole thing has changed in quarantine, I would imagine. Touring? What touring? Record sales are now online. Sponsorships and endorsements? Maybe. Some of them act. Licensing still is out there. Publishing still out there. Merchandise has taken over a little bit of the touring. Right in here, I see a lot of bands and artists um, trying to do like package deals. So they have an album coming out, or they'll do a live show and sell T-shirts for the live show online, live stream. Um, we were just watching yesterday the Dropkick Murphys performed at Fenway Park in and on the baseball diamond, and did a full set, but sold thousands of T-shirts to raise awareness for the event. And of course, a lot of this is going towards charities and foundations, both for COVID and for the Black Lives Matter movement. There is a lot of this going on out there. So, if you have a favorite artist, support them and support their causes, because this is the way they're making their money right now. More than likely, most tours in 2020 are gone, are done. We all hope we can go back to a venue, but I don't think it's going to happen, because you cancel one or two or dates, fine. You cancel 50 dates, then what's the point of even doing the last 5, right? The costs to staging and hiring and ticket sales and all the other stuff that go into it for touring is not worth it for a 5 city tour. It's just not worth it. So they'll just cancel the whole thing. And unfortunately, we're not going to see live music probably for quite some time until everything gets back up. So how are these musicians and artists, sustaining? Obviously, record sales, streaming sales, and their social media. Their, some people, if they have an album out, it was awesome. But of course, their merchandise that goes with these. They're selling private ticketed virtual events, which are very, very cool. And even like very unique things for the future. A lot of people are basically creating bonds for their band. We're going to be a band for 20 years. We're not going anywhere. Here's what we'll do. If you buy this, buy that now, in the future, we're going to have a date where you can come and do a meet and greet and do a sign, or we'll do a private event at your house. Or they're actually taking equity out on the future now just to support themselves now. So interesting what's going on out there. But we're going to go a little bit more into that tomorrow. Again, I appreciate you guys hanging out with me today. This video will be up on the YouTube page right afterwards. I will see everybody tomorrow right here on the Zoom at 10 a.m. bright and early. Everyone stay good. Everyone stay healthy. Everyone enjoy the day. And I'll see you later. Hala, hala, hala.